Hello and welcome to Barkin Labs March Madness edition. Today we are going to be talking about the Activity Series, which is a lab where you figure out a ranking of each one of the metals. We've got 6 different metals: aluminum, copper, zinc, iron, magnesium, lead. Notice I've got all various kinds of pieces of metal that you are going to be putting into various liquids. And you can kind of think about it a little bit like a bracket that you are putting all the metals against all of the metal salts. That's things like aluminum sulfate, copper sulfate, zinc sulfate, iron nitrate, magnesium sulfate, and lead nitrate. And how you can tell if it is more reactive or not has to do with when you combine the metal with a metal salt. If there's a reaction, then the metal is more reactive. So in lab on Wednesday, we had this copper. We put it into a solution of aluminum sulfate, and we saw no reaction at all. Just to give you an idea, aluminum sulfate, here's aluminum chloride. That's what we're going to be using in this lab. Aluminum chloride is just a crystal. You can hear it. I dissolve it in some water. It becomes aqueous is the term for that. It just means dissolved in water, kind of like sodium chloride. Table salt can be dissolved in water. And we saw no reaction here with the copper and the aluminum sulfate. So we would go to our little grid that we just drew here, and copper, aluminum sulfate, nothing. You can put X, you can put an NR for no reaction. However, when we tested aluminum foil in copper sulfate, remember this used to be blue when you started this, definitely reaction. There's a color change, there were bubbles being produced, there was heat being produced. Those are all evidences of chemical change. So now you go to copper sulfate and aluminum and you put all of those down there. So color change and bubbles and heat. Those are all things that we saw there. So you've actually got 2 of those things on your grid filled out already. Now, why the grid? It has to do with the well plate. This is how we do our microchemistry, is rather than do a separate test tube for every single substance, because that's kind of wasteful in terms of your all of your materials. If you've got a big well plate, notice that the well plate corresponds with, oh god, I can't do this backwards. Well plate corresponds with the grid. We've got 8 by 6, so that's 6 times 8 is 48 total little spots, little wells, where you can put a metal and the metal salt into. We don't actually need to use the entire table. We only need to use the first 6 columns. Is that 6? I can't count. Yes, first 6 columns. So some of those will go unused. And one of the ways to be successful in this lab is paying attention to detail, not accidentally rotating yours, keeping track of where you've got what chemical, and putting it in the right place in the beginning. So in all of these rows up top, so all the way along here, I would, with my pipette, I would put a little squirt of aluminum sulfate. And then in everything in the second row, I'd have a squirt of copper sulfate, and so on all the way down. And then everything in that column, so everything right here, you put a little bit of aluminum foil. You can crumple up a little bit and drop it in there. Everything in the second column, you can put a little bit of copper. So it's a nice kind of orderly, systematic way of pitting them against each other, kind of like a bracket in March Madness. And once you are completely done with that, you will be able to rank them. And what we did in class, I'm going to erase this, what we did in class today on Wednesday was we saw that Al was greater than Cu in terms of their reactivity. Well, we've got 6 total different metals. You should start with the most reactive down here and the least reactive down here, and kind of come up with that final ranking. One last way of figuring that out has to do with using hydrochloric acid. You are going to, in test tubes this time, you are going to add a squirt or 2 of hydrochloric acid into each one of your 6 test tubes, and you'll test it with each of those 6 metals. Just like the other chemical reactions, the more reactive the metal, the more likely it is to have a reaction with the hydrochloric acid. So that's pretty much it. Like I said, the biggest thing is just keeping track of where you have put your materials and putting them in the right spots. And then you're observing to see what kind of chemical reactions there are. And then it's a little logic puzzle game to figure out what the order must be at the end. As far as the relevance, This is really the basis of what a battery is. When these elements are when these substances are reacting together, they are gaining and losing electrons, and that's ultimately what electricity is. It's a flow of electrons. So we're going to take a more reactive metal and a less reactive metal, and we'll make a battery out of them because electrons will be lost from the more reactive to the less reactive, and we'll put a wire in between them, and that will give us electricity. Thank you for watching, and I hope you guys have a great Gates day.